Hey guys, I've got a really funny video for you all today. In this video, I'm going to be going over 5 different examples where tournament Scrabble players challenged valid everyday words. And you might be thinking, how is that possible? Tournament Scrabble players know all of these seemingly ridiculous, obscure words, so how could they not recognize a super common word? Well, as you'll see in this video, these things definitely do happen, and some of these examples are rather mind-blowing, so be prepared to laugh a lot and hopefully feel a little bit better about some of your own mistakes over the Scrabble board as you watch the rest of this video. We're going to start right off the bat with probably the most famous example in Scrabble history, and it involves an extremely short word. In fact, this word is only 3 letters long, and it's spelled W-A-S. I don't unfortunately recall the 2 players who were involved in this game, but in any case, one of the players played the word W-A-S, and his opponent didn't recognize it and indicated he might be considering challenging. Now, his opponent's logic was that he knew his 2 other words, and he knew that W-A was not a valid 2-letter word. So he reasoned, if W-A isn't a valid 2-letter word, then how can you pluralize it? Because it doesn't make sense to pluralize a word that's not valid and get a valid word. So he was like, if you can't have one wa, then how can you have multiple was? And therefore he was like, I'm challenging. Now, of course, this was a big mistake, as of course this word is not was, it is was. And the funniest part of this story is that this game actually took place many years ago before the advent of computer programs that allowed automated word adjudication. So this was back in the day when tournaments would have a designated human word judge who'd be walking around the room, and if someone challenged a word, they would yell challenge, and then the human who was responsible for checking the words would go over to that table, ask what word was being challenged, and then look through an alphabetical dictionary to see if it was indeed in the word list or not. And the funny part is, at this tournament, I believe one of the players' young kids was doing this responsibility of going around and adjudicating challenges. And he was probably about 9 or 10 years old or something. And when he got to the table and the player indicated the word W-A-S that he was challenging, the kid was just like, "You're challenging was?" And the story goes that the player was just super embarrassed and didn't even bother to ask the kid to look it up. He was like, yeah, all right, I'm just going to concede my turn at that point. So yeah, what a crazy story. I mean, this is going to be pretty hard to beat, but don't go anywhere because I have some pretty good examples to follow it up. Our next example features another fairly short word. It's not quite as short as was, but still pretty short. It's just 5 letters long, and it's spelled H-O-N-E-Y. And this word, believe it or not, was taken from a game I played many years ago. I think I was about 11 or 12 years old, so I was still fairly new to the tournament scene, but I was a pretty solid player at that point, probably at least expert level. And my opponent played this 5-letter word, H-O-N-E-Y, against me, and I held the play because it just did not at all seem like a word. I was thinking, how can honey be good? Like, what does that mean? Resembling a hone? I knew hone was a verb. I didn't know of any nounal meaning that hone could have, such that it would have this adjectival form of honey. And on top of that, I had also been studying a lot of sevens, and specifically high probability sevens that come up a lot in Scrabble games at that point in my Scrabble career. And one rack that comes up a lot would contain the letters in honiest, H-O-N-I-E-S-T. And I figured if honey were a word, then it would probably compare as an adjective, and thus honiest, H-O-N-I-E-S-T, would be valid. But I knew honiest wasn't valid because I had just studied that rack, and I knew that the only 2 acceptable sevens in that rack were these 2 I've listed over here, ethions and histone. So I was like, honey, it sounds terrible. Honiest is definitely not a word. I'm going to challenge, and that's exactly what I did. So my opponent and I went up to the challenge computer, and it came back valid. And I was pretty surprised, and then, of course, I had a major facepalm moment as we were walking back to the board, as I realized this isn't honey, this is honey. And honey, of course, is a very, very well-known word. It is a type of food that comes from bees. So, very, very embarrassing moment, but all I could really do was laugh it off. I actually don't remember if I ended up winning that game, but I certainly didn't deserve it if I did. Our next example features the 7-letter word spelled S-U-G-G-E-S-T. And this word was actually played once as an opening bingo against my good friend and top expert, Sid Morali. And after his opponent opened with this play, Sid immediately was suspicious and held the play, as he was thinking, this word ends in est, so it's most likely a superlative adjectival form, and he was thinking, well, suggest would be the superlative of sug spelled either S-U-G or possibly S-U-G-G. It could have just the one G, as if you think about it, say the word big, the superlative form would be biggest, spelled with 2 G's, not 1 G. So This could possibly be either the superlative form of SUG or SUGG. But, as Sid knew, neither SUG nor SUGG were valid words. So he was like, how can you have a superlative form of an adjective that's not even a word in the first place? That makes no sense. So if you can't be sug in the first place, then you certainly can't be the most sug, and therefore this is ridiculous and I'm challenging. And that's exactly what Sid did. He challenged, and of course he regretted this as the play came back valid, and almost immediately after it came back valid, he realized his mistake and noticed that this word is actually not suggest, it is suggest. Of course, a very common verb. So, pretty embarrassing, but Sid definitely got a good laugh out of this one. Our next example features another 7-letter word spelled C-O-N-G-E-S-T. And when this word was played, the opponent immediately sensed something was off and held the play, because similarly to the last example we just discussed, they were thinking Kong, C-O-N-G, is not a word. So if Kong isn't a word, then Kongist certainly isn't a word either. Because once again, just like we saw with the previous example, if you have an adjective that's not a word, then you can't just make a superlative of that adjective and that becomes a word. It just that's just not the way that the language works. So they're thinking, if Kong isn't a word, then Kongist isn't a word. You can't be the most Kong if you can't be Kong in the first place. So therefore, I'm going to challenge. And of course, just like the previous example, they quickly realized their mistake after this came back valid, as this word is not Kongist, it is congest, another very common verb just like suggest. So yet another somewhat embarrassing example, but also one worthy of quite a lot of laughs. Our next example features a much longer word. This is actually an 11-letter word spelled E-L-A-B-O-R-A-T-I-N-G. Now, it's pretty rare to see a word as long as 11 letters on a Scrabble board, so let's first talk about how this play appeared. It was played by my good friend and top player Jackson Smiley, and the word borating, spelled B-O-R-A-T-I-N-G, was already on the board, and Jackson made this really clever front extension play, putting his E, L, and A in front of borating, reaching the triple word scored with his E and scoring a good number of points. His opponent held the play and didn't really think this was valid because they were thinking elaborating, elaborating, neither of those sounded at all like words. And it's also worth mentioning that Jackson is well known for his penchant for playing and often getting away with creative phonies. He's actually been featured in several of my videos on some of the most hilarious phonies that have stayed on Scrabble boards. So possibly that fact combined with, again, the fact that this didn't phonetically sound like a word, ultimately caused his opponent to make the decision to challenge this play. Now, this was a decision they would quickly come to regret after realizing that this word is not elaborating or elaborating, but the common word of elaborating. And in his opponent's defense, it's a little bit tricky because with borating on the board, it's kind of natural to just get stuck in pronouncing it as borating. And it might not be entirely obvious that when you put tiles in front of it, the pronunciation changes a little bit to elaborating. The B-O-R kind of goes more with the E-L-A as opposed to the A-T-I-N-G. So I'm sure definitely a little bit embarrassing for his opponent once they realize their mistake, but I hope if nothing else, if Jackson's opponent is watching this video, they feel a little bit vindicated by some of the other much shorter and I would argue much more embarrassing mistakes, including the one made by myself on Honey, and feel a little bit better about challenging elaborating. So that's it for this video, guys. Those were my 5 examples. I hope you enjoyed it and got some good laughs, and like I said at the beginning, maybe feel a little bit better about some of the word knowledge lapses that you've made in the past. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Let me know how you enjoyed it. Appreciate the feedback as always, and I'll see you soon for the next video. Have a good one. Bye-bye.